as Michael said, I direct the Harvard Study of Adult Development. It is the longest in-depth study of human life that has ever been done. It began in 1938. It continues to this day, a study of 724 families. It started with a group of Harvard College sophomores, 19-year-olds, and a group of inner city Boston boys from the most troubled families. And eventually we brought in spouses, and eventually we brought in children, all of whom are baby boomers now. And what's so rare about it is that people have stayed in the study so that we could continue this scientific endeavor with thousands of people, year after year after year, asking them about their lives, measuring their physical health, asking about mental health, work life, family, other relationships, and eventually aging and retirement. John F. Kennedy was part of the Harvard group. Ben Bradley, longtime editor of the Washington Post. The Boston Strangler was part of the inner city group, but most people weren't famous or infamous. They were just living their lives. And what we do is we follow forward people to understand what is real life like for thousands of people. And so shortly, I'll spend some time talking about some of the big takeaways that we find from studying these lives.
Thanks so much, Bob. So I also wanted to introduce Bob's counterpart in the class of 1998, our classmate, Alexis, who is a faculty member at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. She studies the college experience and the process of coming of age across generations there. And her book, The End of Adolescence, The Lost Art of Delaying Adulthood, follows a group of students at Harvard and Radcliffe colleges in the 1970s. And along with her co-author, she followed this group of alumni from an old study that she found and revived from the mid-70s all the way through the present time. Alexis, thank you so much for being here. Will you share a little bit about your work?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that introduction. It's such a joy to be here. And while Bob and I sort of look at many of these similar questions about life across this arc of adulthood and how we change and grow over time, our study was quite accidental. I was doing some research in the Bureau of Study Council. Some of you may remember that old white building on Linden Street. And I discovered this clue to the fact that there had been a research study conducted for the decade of the 1970s. With students who were invited to come to the Bureau and tell the story of their undergraduate experiences at the end of each academic year. So each of the participants were interviewed 4 times, and we had at least a notion that somewhere this study existed. It took me literally a year of sort of mirroring my father, who was an archaeologist, climbing through old basements in Harvard buildings, pulling up things from the archives to piece together all of these materials and to resurrect a study that had been abandoned in the 1980s. And what we had when I did that were not only all of these beautiful materials from the research team, but reel-to-reel recordings of the voices of students who were living their lives, coming in and telling the stories of what stood out to them. My research partner, Dr. Nancy Hill, and I, since 2016, when I made the initial discovery, have spent time really getting to know the voices of these students and their stories. And as Michael mentioned, that culminated in our book, The End of Adolescence, which looks at the surprisingly similar aspects of the college experience that transcend generations. But as you might imagine, if you spend years listening to the voices of students telling their stories, and the last time you hear them is just before they graduate in May of 1975, for personal context, that's weeks before I was born, it sort of plagues you, wondering what actually happened next. We heard these students just before their own graduation telling the story of what they thought their life would look like. But what did their life actually look like? We were able to get permission from the provost of the university to reopen the study, to go back to these folks and offer them not only the opportunity to reflect on the college years, but to re-meet themselves at the age of 21, 22, 23 years old, to listen to these recordings and make meaning anew of the stories that they told in real time. You can imagine what it's like to hear the voice from the past in the way that they have been able to, and it has been such a privilege and gift to learn from them, not only 50 years later, how college shaped their lives, but what lessons their younger selves can still offer today. And as someone who studies the contemporary college experience, there's an incredible trove that we can learn from them that really helps our students on campuses and off campuses around the globe today.
Thank you so much, Alexis. So let's get into this research that the two of you have done. Bob, I want to start with you. So your research continues basically 8 decades of following Harvard students throughout the arc of their lives. Can you share with us lessons and data points that you think shed the most light on those questions that the class of 98 is wrestling with in our midlife?
Sure. So our big takeaways, after hundreds of scientific papers and 11 books, the big takeaways are about taking care of your physical health and taking care of your relationships. And that's probably the one that we want to spend some time on, particularly in our breakout rooms, because what we find is that the people who are more connected to others and have warm relationships with others live longer and stay healthier longer. They're not just happier. And I think the other thing we can say is that midlife is not by definition a crisis. It is a transition. And we can talk about that, but nowhere is it written that we have to be in crisis. The transition comes because we all get more and more aware of our own mortality. And instead of making us depressed, that turns out to make us happier. As a species, human beings get happier starting in midlife and moving forward because they end up making changes to prioritize well-being and not putting everything off to the future. And so that's one of the most hopeful takeaways that we have from our study.
That's really heartening to hear. When members of the class of 98 hear that, I think a lot of us will say that makes a lot of sense. And also, how do we do it? Does your research shed some light on the how of those people who really kept up their relationship health and found a way to be healthier, happier, longer?
Yeah, it's really prioritizing relationships instead of burying ourselves in work or even in just the basic tasks of child rearing and caring for aging parents, all of which are pressures, particularly in midlife. And so it means trying to be as intentional as we can about staying in touch with friends. And that might literally mean texting somebody or emailing somebody, day after day, just reaching out to a different person, making sure you see the important people in your life. Because otherwise, what we find is that all the pressures of life end up making our good relationships wither away from neglect. So I think that what we talk about, we wrote a book last year called The Good Life, and in it we talk about these findings about relationships. We talk about this thing we call social fitness, which is kind of an analogy to physical fitness, that if you practice it like physical fitness on a weekly basis, you stay in touch, you stay current with the people in your life, and it makes a huge difference in your physical well-being and certainly in your happiness.
That idea of practice and intentional practice of something that's not physical fitness or mental fitness, but relationship fitness is a really interesting one. Obviously, your book is a resource there. Are there other resources that you recommend that people look at as well if they're thinking, how do I do that?
Oh, there are lots of resources. There are good books about relating to other people. There's some really excellent research. So for example, we know what the easiest way is to make new friends, which has to do with putting yourself alongside other people in an activity you all care about. It might be volunteering for a political cause. It might be gardening clubs. It might be a golf league, anything. So there's research that shows how relationships form and get maintained. And one of the things we find in our study is that even people who think, I've never been good at relationships, it's too late for me, many of them find that they're surprised that in fact change happens and that new things happen. And so what we are able to see is that if we're more intentional, instead of taking relationships for granted, if we're more intentional in how we prioritize them, the investment pays off hugely in terms of how well we feel life is going.
It's really exciting to hear because it actually sounds very simple, right? Just do things you're interested in and connect with the people who are also interested in those things.
Well, and also because many people say, oh my God, I've got kids, I've got a job, I've got aging parents, I can't add one more thing. And what we say is find the little crevices. If you have a commute, call somebody or text somebody each day on your commute. If you go to the gym, ask somebody to meet you there. Add people to your downtime, add people to your exercise time, add people in the places you can. And you don't have to add time in order to do that necessarily.
That's really terrific. Thank you so much, Bob. And so that people know, we will be coming back more consistently throughout this to Bob and Alexis, especially at the end, to kind of help us make sense of the things that we've heard and learned and the personal stories that have been shared. Alexis, if you don't mind, let's turn to you and your work and give us some perspective on that same question that I asked Bob, which is with those big questions the class of 98 said that we are wrestling with at this stage of life. What insights does the study that you have worked on provide us to help us to wrap our heads around the answers to those questions?
Yes, wonderful. Thank you for that question. And I would like to return to something that for those of you who were with us in Sanders Theater for the class of 98, I planted the seed around and I feel a little bit differently about today. And so I wanted to talk about that. The finding that I shared is that across our study, as we are reintroducing our participants to their younger selves and playing the recordings, and as they are also reflecting on their Red Book entries and thinking about how things change over time, that there really is this pivot point around the 25th or 30th reunion, this moment to press pause, reflect, and ask the big developmental questions. Who am I? Who do I want to be? And the spark for that was different for everyone. It might have been a health scare, a new career, or a growing sense of career misfit, loss of someone who we love. And as I told my classmates at the reunion, there was this sense that it wasn't too late to make a big change. It was still possible. And we did see many of our participants make those changes of career, of partner, of moving to the other side of the globe. But what I said then was something that the participants told us, which was that there was also a sense that that window was closing. It wasn't too late, but it was almost too late. And I've really thought quite differently about that, as I've thought not just about what they told me, but about what their lived experience was. Because what I was seeing is that, of course, it wasn't too late for those pivots to happen. And I'm thinking, so I'm here in Boston today. My mom flew in to come spend my 49th birthday with me to go to Boston Pride. My mother is about a year out from losing my father, and she's someone who I saw make that big career pivot midlife, moving from a very successful business career to moving into the academy as a professor. And I sort of thought her big change of life was over, and based on the original things those participants were saying, that would be true. But what we did this afternoon is I helped her practice her tap routine for the tap dance class that she just started, doing exactly what Bob just named, finding an activity that was fun and enjoyable with people who were sharing in the newness of doing something that was completely unprecedented. That idea that it isn't too late to take up new hobbies, to do new things. And as I look back at the transcripts of the interviews with the folks who said to me that the window was closing, what I realized is they were saying that from a new city where they had just moved, a new activity that they were participating in. And so I wanted to revisit that idea because yes, at the reunion, I was wedded to it's almost too late, but of course it's not. In our 70s, we can make those pivots and it is just as meaningful then as now. So lesson to me, listen not just to what people are saying, but what they are doing at the same time.
That makes a lot of sense and is quite sage. And I noticed Bob shaking his head. No, it's not too late as you started to say that. So I think his research confirms this as well. We have just maybe one more minute here on this section, and we're going to move to some stories from the class of 73. Let me ask a final question here of the two of you. We talked about this in the prep call. The opportunity to examine these type of questions and to do it together is very valuable, but also seems to us to be relatively rare. Why is it so rare for us to come across these opportunities?
Well, I'm a shrink, right? So I talk to people who often come because they've never had anybody to talk to about these things. And I think many of us have been socialized to think it's not okay to talk about these things, to feel like we are,
So, how are you?
that we're
It's
the
kind of heavy.
only
Be
people
careful.
who are
Thanks.
having these issues. And I think what it sounds like what happened for all of you in the class of 98 is you had this wonderful experience of realizing, oh my gosh, we have so much in common in terms of what we're struggling with. And I think if we can create more settings where people are able to take the risk to share the big challenges that they're having, it opens up a whole world that many of us have been socialized not to talk about.
Absolutely. I think also the social comparison, it's a really powerful thing. It's something that develops for us in early adolescence and it lingers throughout our lives. This concern that maybe we're doing it wrong. Maybe people don't think we have it all figured out. Maybe there are adultier adults in the room who have it all together. And I think the moment we pierce that bubble and we are vulnerable and candid about the struggles we are having, it is remarkable to see struggles and triumphs, really. It's remarkable to see just how quickly we can begin to share those stories and find those points of connection. It just takes one brave person in the room to say, hey, I don't get this, or hey, this is hard for me, or here's where I'm struggling, for 4 or 5 more people to, pipe up and be like, you know what, I'm struggling too. I'm so glad you said it. It's something I tell my students in class, if you have a question, ask it, because there are a dozen people in the room who you will be doing them a favor because they haven't asked it. We need to have that courage to open up this space with our own vulnerability so that we can do that.
Simple stuff, but so important. Thank you to you both.